Well, the rest of the world, they are reacting. So, for example, I think last week or not that long ago, China, Japan, and South Korea, they had a ministry, I think a finance or commerce ministry meeting, which haven't happened for quite a long time. And in that meeting, they talked a lot of things. And among others, they have been talking about how to respond to the tariffs wars in coordinates. So, and of course, Macron said, although you have to take whatever Macron says with a grain of salt. Now, Macron says that he calls it there shouldn't be any investment to the United States. So some kind of a revenge or something. So what do you think the rest of the world will react to this moving forward?
Well, this is where we come back to the change in the world today. Today, America accounts for just 13% global demand, and I think that's an overestimate. By the way, I think that I think that exaggerate, and that may the real figure may be actually as little as half of that. So the rest of the world can get by without the United States, and I think one of the most hopeful things that has happened is finally Japan agreeing to speak with China about economic things. I mean, Japan has been on a very, very bad trajectory for a long, long time now. And finally, they're talking to China about these things. So what the rest of the world needs to do is it needs to get to work round this foolish, lost country until it eventually comes to its senses. And you develop Belt and Road, you build up the BRICS, you set up the new financial systems, you do all of those things, and then eventually, as I said, when the rest of the world starts to get itself organized and its trading systems start working, which could be done very quickly, by the way. I mean, it's a mistake to think that this would take years. If it was done in a purposeful, intelligent way, then, as I said, it could work its way through very, very fast. Then the Americans will want to rejoin, and they will perhaps come to the senses themselves, and it will be better for them too. But that's what needs to happen, and it's not impossible. It can be done. Policies of economic revenge against the United States are pointless, in my opinion. I mean, what are they going to achieve? If they're successful, they will only intensify this absurd sense of victimization you already find in the United States. And I mean, they're a waste of time. Focus on doing all of these other things. China now has a huge economy. It's got its huge internal demand. It's got many friends around the world. Just go ahead and develop that and build on that. Asia has been hammered by these sanctions. So countries like Vietnam, Indonesia, for example, which had been, trying to sit on the fence. Well, now they see what America is really all about. I mean, Vietnam must be particularly angry, I would have thought, especially 46% tariffs on a developing economy, which has already been smashed by the United States in the 60s and early 70s, and which was previously basically sanctioned and embargoed by the United States, as I well remember, right through the 1980s. So, I mean, they've got an alternatives now. The alternatives are there. The framework is being built. Move forward and build on that. Interestingly, The Economist, staunchly pro-American Neocon magazine as it is, actually sent some of its people to China just before these big tariff announcements. We all knew they were coming. And they found an atmosphere of confidence of people there thinking about the way forward. There's a whole article about this in The Economist, which I think people in China should read.
Okay, I'll look into it. Well, talking about that, I want to ask you about Wang Yi's visit to Russia. So Wang Yi was there just the other day, and he met with Lavrov and with Putin. Yeah, so the official reason for Wang Yi's visit is to prepare for Xi Jinping's visit early May, okay? But I wonder whether also for both Russia and China, there is a sense of, at some point, the world has to move on with or without United States. So they are working on that as well. So it's not just about preparing for Xi Jinping's visit or this event or that event. I think the two countries are probably doing some, on a regular basis, a big task, which is they need to move on with or without the U.S. Is that true?
Absolutely. Now, the thing to say about Wang Yi's visit, first of all, is that it's a 3-day visit. So he was there for 3 days. He met with everybody that is important. He met with Putin. He met with Lavrov. He met with Ushakov. There are reports that he's even met with some of the economics people in Russia. So it was clearly not just to sort out the protocol arrangements for Xi Jinping's coming. So it's a very, very big visit. The second is that it got wall-to-wall coverage in the Russian media. I mean, this was something that a lot of attention was paid to his coming in Russia, and the language that came out of all of these meetings, is that the Russian-Chinese strategic partnership is, it is non-negotiable. Third parties cannot interfere with it. We're not going to accept any kind of interference. So Russia isn't going to be talked into abandoning China by the United States. China isn't going to be threatened into abandoning Russia by the United States. But there was something that they're saying now, which they said before, but they're saying it more, is that this partnership is an anchor of stability in this incredibly volatile international system that we have now. So that these two great powers, the fact that they are friends, the fact that they're working together, that they're friends forever, as I think Wang Yi said, that is a stabilizing factor in international relations in terms of foreign policy and increasingly economic policy. Wang Yi, it is not a coincidence, I think, that he was in Moscow just before these tariff announcements from the United States. And by the way, I don't think it was a coincidence either that they took place, this visit took place at the same time that there were these big naval exercises in the Straits of Taiwan that China was conducting. Given that just before the visit, we had reports appearing in the American media, of which I am sure China was already aware before these reports, that Pete Hegseth has circulated within the Pentagon, this big memorandum about how China is the great enemy and it must now be given number one priority over everything else. So the Russians know about it. The Chinese know about it. They understand that all that's happening is that America is scaling down in Europe and Ukraine, where it failed, so it can go back to its obsession, its current obsession with it, which is China. They know all about the tariffs that were coming. They know all about the threats, the further threats of mounting economic warfare against Russia. So they want to talk together. They want to make sure that at the highest level, each side understands what may be coming and that they are signaling to each other that the relationship is secure and stable, and that they are signaling to the world, the rest of the world, this is a stable relationship. It is the anchor in the international system. If you are looking for stability, if you're looking for predictability, if you're looking for rational decision making, you look to us.
Well, it's interesting you brought up Pete Hegseth, the memo that got leaked, talking about China being the real enemy, and almost like urged the whole Pentagon to prepare for war with China. That's more or less what he was saying. Well, Trump so far, whenever he was asked, okay, if China is going to so-called invade, I would use unification, but unify. But the U.S. media always saying when China invade, how can you invade yourself, right? When Taiwan is officially being regarded part of China. But anyway, so when
by
China,
the United States, just to make that additional point.
Yeah. But so-called invasion, okay, if that happens, is the U.S. going to help Taiwan and guarantee some kind of a security guarantee? And Trump has constantly said it's not good. That's not going to happen because I'll make sure it's not happen, which means he declined to give that kind of a security guarantee. So far, that has been his answer. At the same time, we just say that Pete Hegseth had that memo. Not only that, he was recently visiting Japan, and this is what he said in it's called the honor ceremony on Iwo Jima. He said that we are here today because we have not forgotten the honor and the valor of our Japanese and American warriors and we reaffirm the generous pledge. Our Marines, our soldiers, our sailors from both Japan and United States, their service and their sacrifice would never be forgotten. So without mentioning a word, the Japanese was fighting Americans. A brutal fight in Iwo Jima, right? The whole narrative now is, okay, we are big, friends, allies, so we're going to against China. Basically, he rewrite the history in a way, right? So I got a mixed message from the Trump administration, him versus Pete Hegseth. How do you explain that?
Well, I think the first thing to say is to talk about Pete Hegseth and what he said in Iwo Jima, because it is absolutely shocking. I mean, it's like a Russian general having a meeting with people in Germany and saying, our great blood brothers, the warriors of the SS, we must never forget them. We were, fighting alongside, we may have been fighting each other, but we have the warrior spirit on each side. I mean, it is such a terrible thing to say about what Japan was at that time and Japanese militarism and what that was all about. Such a betrayal of the sacrifice of all those American soldiers who fought against all of that. Such a betrayal of the wartime alliance between the United States and China. And again, it's essential to point this out. I mean, the Americans seem completely oblivious to the fact that China actually fought Japan much longer, fought a far greater part of the Japanese military than the United States ever did. I mean, I'm sorry to dwell on that, but it is true. I mean, there were millions of Japanese soldiers fighting in China, far more than the United States ever fought at any one particular time. And anybody who knows what the Japanese were doing, anybody who knows what the Japanese were doing in China, anybody who knows what the Japanese were doing elsewhere in Asia would be absolutely horrified by these comments. And of course, the other thing it does is it lends support to the most sinister and dangerous forces within Japan itself. The militarists, the people who want to rehabilitate the policies of the 1930s and not just the 1930s, the entire era of Japanese militarism and Japanese expansion. It was a terrible thing what Pete Hegseth said. And can I just say, because I used to work with a lot of Japanese people, including Japanese people who had fought in China during the Second World War and who were deeply remorseful about what they had done there. I mean, I remember some of them telling me that they couldn't sleep over it. I mean, that betrays them too, by the way. But Japan is not a monolith. There are different currents of thinking inside Japan. And as I said, again, Pete Hegseth, America, out of this anti-Chinese obsession, are lining up and supporting the worst ones, just as they've done the same in Ukraine, by the way, and in all sorts of other places. So this was an absolutely terrible thing. Now, about the administration itself, Donald Trump doesn't like wars. He thinks that they're expensive, that he probably has at some level an understanding that America has not actually done very well in any of its recent wars, going all the way back to the Second World War. It's never won a clear-cut victory against a peer opponent. I don't think he understands deeply about this, but he understands that wars don't work well for the United States. He probably also understands, because he's somebody who, whatever one may say about him, he goes out a lot to the American heartlands. He speaks to people there. He probably understands that war is not a popular policy with the American people. But at the same time, we have to face this reality. There is a militaristic strain within American society. There is a militaristic strain within the American government. They are deeply, deeply hostile to China at the moment. They've decided China is the great adversary. And they are talking about defending Taiwan and fighting for Taiwan, even though, as you absolutely correctly say, they recognize Taiwan already as part of China. So what's the point? So there it is. Now, there is an extra dimension to this, because I get the sense that Trump doesn't particularly like Taiwan, or at least the regime there. He
Yeah.
sees them as having exploited the US as well.
Yeah.
Taiwan was also hit by all of these tariffs, just to say,
Mm-hmm.
not as much as China was, but nonetheless also. He wants Taiwan to basically ship its entire semiconductor industry to the United States. So he also has that, there's that additional dimension for him. But if you're talking about, wider opinion within the American elite, at the moment they're all about war with China, and they talk in that way. And I don't actually think America will go to war with China to defend Taiwan, just as they, in the end, didn't go to war with Russia to defend Ukraine. I think they understand that America would risk its own existence if it found itself in that kind of war. But of course, the separatists in Taiwan hear all of this rhetoric. They probably believe that America will indeed come and protect them. And as a result, they go on doing what they're doing. And of course, they're encouraged to do it by some people in the US, actively encouraged to do it by some people in the US who hate China.
Well, I agree with you that I think Trump doesn't like war, but at the same time, Pete Hegseth, for one thing, I think Pete, I don't know, I don't think he's a very, he has a lot of depth of understanding of I think I saw at one point he had an interview talking about Taiwan. He actually believed China want to keep Taiwan is because he's TSMC, because of the semiconductor, which has nothing, which is not true at all, because China has declared a part, Taiwan has been part of China from the beginning. China never changed the narrative long before TSMC, existed, right? Somehow.
No Chinese government, be it the Tsing, the Kuomintang, Chiang Kai-shek. I always call him Chiang Kai-shek. I know he's called by a different name in China. And of course, the current government, China. No Chinese government has ever wavered in its belief that, its belief, in its knowledge, in its assertion that Taiwan is a part of China. It is ridiculous to think that this is going to, it's all about TMC. One of the reasons for the quarrel between the Soviet Union and China in the 1950s is that the Chinese felt, correctly, by the way, that the Soviet Union wasn't providing China with the necessary backing in the 1950s to bring Taiwan back into the homeland. I mean, people just do not get this in the West because they don't understand Chinese history or the experience of what the Chinese people have been through, and the way in which the Chinese people want to reverse, to re-establish as part of the revival of their country, the division of their country, which was forced upon it by the Western powers and Japan, by the way.
Yeah, Pete Hegseth, and also I think Marco Rubio is another. I think these are all hawks against China. So so you see Trump himself against the war, doesn't really want to have a war with China, yet he's surrounded by these people who I'm sure are giving him hawkish ideas, pushing him. And you see, I don't know how long he can weather this. He can resist that because he is bombing Yemen. At one point, he was against bombing Yemen, I think. But now he's bombing Yemen because, I don't know, somebody around him. And he's now, of course, talking constantly about bombing Iran. So how much he is truly fully can control his foreign policy team is my question.
Well, that's an excellent question. I mean, we saw in his first term that he couldn't in the end. that ultimately, even though he didn't want to, apparently, he ended up sending weapons to Ukraine, for example. He reversed the policy, Obama's policy on Ukraine, and started arming Ukraine, leading us directly to the point that we are now. The same, I suspect, with Iran, the Houthis, all of this. He may not want war, but he's never come out sufficiently strongly and told all these people around him, we're not into war. This is not our policy. We look after the United States and the United States alone. He's never had the courage or perhaps even the conviction to say that. And until he does, and unless he does, which I don't believe he ever will, by the way, then he will always be drawn back into conflicts, this time against the Houthis, possibly against Iran, all of those, and conceivably one day against China, even though at some level he probably doesn't want them.
Now, in the Duran, you repeatedly said that in the end, the neocons, they always win. Okay, whatever the decision is, it seems like the neocons always win. Why is that they always win? You see, when we look at this signals chat scandal, right? You can tell J.D. Vance is skeptical about bombing Yemen. Okay, but he was overridden by Pete Hegseth. Just like that. And then I also read at some point of when they were making decisions about bombing Libya, for example, how they did was they had a meeting. So Obama and Gates, I think at the time the Secretary of the Defense was Gates, Bob Gates, and then Biden. The three of them had a telephone conference with Hillary Clinton, who was at the time in Brussels, and she just had a conversation with a Libyan rebel. Of course, that person would tell her all the horror stories because he wanted the U.S. to come into Libya to help him, to get rid of Muammar Gaddafi. So they had this meeting, and Hillary Clinton is the one person who wanted to bomb Libya. All the other three guys, Bob Gates, Joe Biden, and Barack Obama, they were all skeptical about bombing Libya. But in the end, Hillary Clinton prevailed.
Yeah.
Whatever the reason, I think there's some dynamics. The three guys don't want to override a woman or something. I don't know. But whatever the reason, she prevailed. She's the hawkish one, and she prevailed.
Yeah.
And J.D. Vance was overridden by Hegseth. Why is it that the neocons, they always win? Why is it?
Right. I think there's two reasons. First of all, the neocons have been very, very successful in representing any doubts, any skepticism about the use of American power, military power, as somehow skepticism about the United States itself. So if you say, look, we shouldn't get involved in Libya, we shouldn't get involved in Yemen, we shouldn't fight Iran, we shouldn't fight China. It's you don't believe in the United States. You don't believe in our virtue, in our strength. You are somehow betraying the United States, the idea of the United States. And people are very, very intimidated by this. And I think that this is something that, especially given the lock grip that America has, that the neocons have over the media in the United States, as I said, at a certain specific level, psychological level, skeptics like Vance, Obama, and whomever find it very, very difficult to argue against that. But there is another factor, and it's a very simple, very practical, very material factor, which is that behind the neocons, there is this vast armaments industry in the United States, which pours out the money into the various think tanks, which lobbies the Congress people, which has its contacts with the defense contractors and the people inside the Pentagon. There is this huge business and industry in the United States, which has this lock grip on people in Washington. And it always advocates war. It doesn't want compromise because its entire existence is based around war and encouraging war and getting defense spending high and higher still and finding enemies to fight in all sorts of places, either from the military industrial lobby or its political allies. Then you're not going to win elections. It's as simple as that. And that always gives them a massive advantage in any argument in Washington.